Hello, everyone. It's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Well, it is an early Sunday morning, relatively early. I don't tend to get
Come
off
on,
too.
Jamarl. It's 11 a.m.
It's
Everybody should
11
be
a.m.
awake by
early,
now.
man. I'm shocked. I didn't even know it was 6 a.m. existed on Sunday. But nevertheless, it's Sunday. And I have with me the indomitable Michael Tracey. And he has a lot to say about the various things that has taken place over the course of an intense week. So, journalist, reporter, previously of Vice. That's why I think I first discovered you, and also of TYT, incidentally. So, Michael Tracey, please tell the audience hello.
Hello, audience. Hello, Jamarl. Hello, Internet. It has been a very intense week, maybe about 9 days at this point, because the Mueller report was first submitted last Friday at 5 p.m. And then there was there was less than 2 days before the Barr letter came out. So, but ever since then, everybody's been, in total kind of meltdown mode. And I've been definitely excitable because it was the culmination of 3 years of a lot of very heated, contentious animosity that's been heaped on me from various people. But, we can get into all that.
See, and I think that's the thing that I think some people don't quite understand on why there are elements of the left that are either chest stomping or this righteous vindication, almost like a cosmic vindication of a position. In politics, oftentimes we don't have objective reality. We have, these kind of subjective opinions or ideologies that replace real world phenomena. So gravity, physics can't really lie about gravity because gravity just is a subjective reality. But this is, in the Mueller report, to some degree, this question of whether Trump colluded with Russia or not felt objective. Like it felt like, all of this hysteria that has been going on for the last 3 years, using innuendo and touting that innuendo as if it was some kind of flat fact, or if, it clearly Trump colluded with the Russians. And so now we can talk about this other stuff about, evidence for it. But that's also been attacking elements that disagreed with us as conspiracy theorists. And like Cenk hit you saying, these guys got their head in their ass and, wait till they see the check, I suppose, I think is what he said. What is this done to you? So I'm asking this emotionally. I've seen you go after Cenk Uygur for the past week. I've seen you go after Cedar. I've seen you go after empty spokes. I've seen you go after
empty wheel.
Empty wheel, my bad. Empty hubcap, I think I'm but yeah.
Emphasis on the empty part.
Right. Because she was wrong. And I saw Cedar try to defend the fact that she was wrong.
Well, the whole reason I was on the Cedar show ostensibly was because I sent a critical tweet. Granted, it was a provocative tweet. I admit that but for good reason, I think, which is that he hosted Marcy Wheeler on his show multiple times, almost entirely uncritically, where he was giving her a platform and, quote, progressive credence to go on her delusional rants about the Trump-Russia conspiracy. And the central reason why her particular rants on the Trump-Russia conspiracy were so delusional was because she claimed she had personal private evidence of a smoking gun of Trump-Russia collusion.
Now, is this one of those things where somebody's colluding or working with the FBI or CIA and they have a source, and that source just so happens releases information to them that proves something that's just ridiculous? That's what it sounds like.
I can only go by what she has said, which is that she received information that she believed had bearing on this notion of a Trump-Russia conspiracy, which Mueller was investigating. So she went proactively to the FBI and committed what has to be the most mortal sin what anybody can commit in journalism, which is that she proactively and affirmatively burned a source to the cops, in this case, the FBI. That's just what you don't do. Nobody ever does it. Journalists have gone to prison because they refuse to do it, because it's the most foundational ethical tenet of journalism that you protect your sources.
Wait, she gave up her source to the FBI and pursuant to the Trump-Russia stuff?
That's absolutely correct. And in so doing, she became almost a member of the Mueller investigation. She joined Team Mueller. She later coordinated with Mueller. She, bragged basically about her communications with Mueller, and this is all the while she's being touted across the media on MSNBC, the New York Times, and Twitter, where she's very prolific and even more so than me, which is hard to beat. But she beat me in her profligacy, and nobody really critically scrutinized her incredibly outlandish claims, which is that she had this supposed bombshell information that had been privately given to her and that she burned a source of the FBI in order to hand over to the authorities, because she said that she felt some kind of patriotic motivation to get revenge for what she described the Russian attack on America. And remember, by attack on America, we're talking about at most Twitter trolls, Facebook memes, including a meme of Bernie Sanders in a Speedo with a chiseled chest.
Oh, don't forget the Jesus one. Jesus trying to stop people from masturbating or something.
Right. And a spear phishing attack on John Podesta where he clicked a suspicious link and his password was like password 123 or something.
Right.
So that's this crazy, that's this existential crisis inflicted on America by Russia, even though, as we all know, I think we've even discussed this, Jamal, the information contained in those emails that were released by WikiLeaks had innumerable newsworthy pieces of information that were reported on by almost everybody in the American media because they were just so straightforwardly newsworthy.
And all were
so they resulted in the mass resignation of the entire Democratic National Committee on the eve of the Democratic Convention in 2016. They revealed that the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign had started to merge operations in the 2016 primary at Bernie Sanders' expense. They revealed that DNC officials conspired to spread anti-Semitic propaganda about Bernie Sanders during the southern state primaries in 2016. They revealed that the Clintons had lied about the nature of their foundation, and they always said that they never got any personal enrichment from it. The WikiLeaks releases definitively proved that was a total lie, and there are more. I mean, I documented them all the time.
Yeah, it was a bombshell. It was a complete bombshell. And by the way, all of it was true. Like, this is not hysteria about Russia, and you find out that a lot of the stuff, they're retracting stories and all this other nonsense. Everything they published was true. And by the way, if it swung an election, then that means it was valid information. Like, the public itself got a wind of something that says, oh my God, I can't vote for that, based on their own theory of events, by their idea that this thing was such a bombshell, was quote unquote attack on America. That the language is nonsense.
Right, but that's the very language invoked by Marcy Wheeler, who again was one of the most, if not the most influential journalist on this story. Even though she's an independent journalist, which I admire in a way, because that's what I'm trying to build. I have a YouTube channel now, so people can subscribe to that if you want to, very kindly put the link up, Jamal.
I saw.
And Patreon and everything else. So I admire that model, but she got a lot of mainstream recognition such that she was touted as one of the most prominent experts on this entire story. And she was saying that because she deemed those three factors, the Twitter trolls, Facebook memes, spear phishing of John Podesta, an attack on America, that impelled her to commit the most mortal sin anybody can commit in journalism, which is proactively burning a source. Judith Miller, who I went on the Sam Cedar show to analogize to Marcy Wheeler, was the New York Times reporter who in 2002, 2003 got fed information from the Bush administration to justify the invasion of Iraq, namely this wild fantasy story about aluminum tubes that somehow suggested that, Saddam had all these kinds of monumental weapons making capacities, right? And it would have to be a total joke. Colin Powell famously cited it at his speech at the UN prior to the invasion. So Judith Miller was rightly deemed a journalistic disgrace for doing that, and her moral offenses are too great to quantify. However, the point that I tried to make to Sam, even though he interrupted me every 5 seconds, and then started literally screaming, he had like an emotional meltdown and a hissy fit. It was actually really embarrassing.
I think I can explain why, but go ahead.
But the point is, Judith Miller, despite her horrible moral offenses and her being expelled essentially from respectable journalism, she protected her sources to the point that she went to jail for 85 days.
Like, it was real for her. She considered herself a journalist, and she knew that there was a mortal sin.
She still adhered to that basic ethical standard, whereas Marcy eagerly and gleefully violated it, supposedly on the basis that she had this secret bombshell information that she always gave cryptic hints would come out eventually. Just wait, Mueller will show all this to have been valid, right? So just wait. She would always like berate people who were asking her for more information about it.
Well, her and Aaron Matei used to get into it all the time on Twitter. Those
right, and
amazing.
I mean, the rot runs so deep just on this very element pertaining to Marcy. I mean, when she came out, so she had been covering the Mueller investigation feverishly and meticulously for a long time. And then all of a sudden, one day in July of 2018, she made this bombshell announcement, hey, I've been cooperating with the FBI. I mean, as if she shouldn't have revealed that right away. The point is she ceased to perform any kind of recognizably journalistic function when the minute she went to the FBI, but she concealed the fact that she went to the FBI and that she was a party to the investigation for months and months and months while she was covering the investigation. Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of thing that would get you fired immediately from any traditional newsroom. And I'm not saying that all traditional newsrooms are like these ethical, unimpeachably ethical institutions, but they had some basic standards, right? And her violation of that standard would have gotten her run out of town in 2 seconds. But see, when she, and I'm sorry, I'm filibustering, but I just want to complete this thought because it's really important. When she made that earth-shaking announcement, I don't know that earth could be shattered. Sorry. When she made the earth-shaking announcement,
it could be shattered.
Okay, whatever.
Resonance. if something hit Earth with the resonance of Earth, then it would shatter like anything else. It's like a bridge. A bridge gets to the point where
when she made that announcement in July of last year, almost nobody tried to probe her reasoning for it, except a little bit Aaron, a little bit me here and there. And that was it. She got celebrated as courageous for doing that. Margaret Sullivan in the Washington Post, who had previously been the public editor of the New York Times, where she actually did very good and diligent work, holding to account in her capacity as the public editor, the journalists and editors at the New York Times when she felt that they had made, ethically or journalistically dubious choices.
Yeah.
So she then went to the Washington Post and she wrote a column on Marcy Wheeler saying this journalist was moved by her conscience to go to the FBI, but don't worry, she has a lot of credibility, so we should just trust her and not try to get the information that she claims that she has that's so explosive. And it was just incredible because if you read that piece, and I mentioned this on Sam Cedar, I don't know if people could even hear it because, again, he was just talking over me the entire time. But in that very piece, Marcy says that part of the reason why she went to the FBI is because she felt that she was under threat of being killed by some combination of Russians and Trump, some Trump-Russia mafia was going to come track her down at her house in Grand Rapids or something and kill her. I mean, that's what literally she said. And that, I'm sorry, is a delusional fantasy, or at least she has given us no reason to believe that it was anything but a delusional fantasy. And she inserted herself to this kind of self-guided journalism adventure as it relates to Mueller, and it was all supposed to come to fruition when Mueller issued his findings, and Mueller issued his findings and totally obliterated everything she had ever said. So the reason why I went at Sam a little bit acerbically is because I was sick and tired of all these, quote, progressive outlets giving credence to the most ludicrous versions of this entire story for 3 years. That includes Cenk. That includes like David Pakman. That includes, the more online progressive media, like, Splinter News, Mother
Pakman
Jones.
Come out saying it's a scam, saying that the Barr report is a scam. Now, I watched that and I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, you would have to believe, for that to be true, you would have to believe that Barr, who has known Mueller for God knows how long, and who's, apparently friends with Mueller, and you would have to believe that Barr is going to write something that is not consistent with the report. Because in every other situation where some information is coming, like the last time where BuzzFeed comes out with that story saying Trump told Cohen to lie to Congress, the Mueller team came on and said, that's not true. Like, so if they've done it once, why do they believe that the Barr report would somehow be some kind of departure from what took place prior? I find that to be like another conspiracy theory on top of it. It's true that the Mueller report isn't released, but I don't necessarily know if you have anything to go by this idea that Barr is writing something that's radically different than what's in the report, and Mueller is not going to say anything about it.
Yeah, they're just putting conspiracy theory on top of conspiracy theories, and they're just making it worse for themselves. They're prolonging the agony. They're empowering Trump because they're making him look comparatively sane.
Yeah.
And you're right. The Bill Barr. I keep saying Bob Barr because Bob Barr was this longtime congressman from Georgia, and he was a Libertarian presidential nominee. Anyway, irrelevant. But Bill Barr and Robert Mueller come from the same social and professional circles. They attended each other's children's weddings. They've been personally attached for decades at this point. And Mueller is coordinating with Barr for the full release of this report, to put in all the redactions to protect the privacy of people who were implicated. And now we've learned that the full report is going to be issued sometime in mid-April, which is a totally reasonable time schedule for this redaction process. I mean, we got the summary letter less than 2 days after the report was submitted.
Right. And
so they've actually been expediting it.
Pages. Like, there's no way for somebody to go through
They've been expediting it because it's good for Trump. I mean, that's why they want it out as quickly as possible. And these people are saying that it's just more conspiracy, and it's insane.
It's such a bizarre thing, man, to have lived through that for the last 2 years.
3 years. It's 3 years because you know what?
And then for the culmination of this one. So one of the questions, look, the reason I think Cedar was getting, more hyped up, part of it, I think, is because he felt that you attacked his guests. That's the first part. The second part, even
not frivolously, right? I mean, I had a rationale for why I was doing that attack.
Yeah, it wasn't arbitrary. I'm not saying he's right or wrong. I'm just saying the rationale. But the second part is he was trying to set up a framing of argument to where if you answered a particular way, you kind of go down a particular rabbit hole. I mean, it became to light afterwards when they were like, because the whole point was, do you believe in the Mueller report in the sense of Trump-Russia stuff? Well, no, yes. Whatever that answer was, the next question was going to be something that kind of goes with it. The problem is, what we believe of Trump and Russia stuff purely came from what we were supposed to believe of Trump and Russia, because when intelligence services and all dropped this information to the public, because that's the only people who could have dropped it into the public, it came off like a bombshell. And this notion of whether or not it was legit or not kind of flew out the window. It's kind of the empty will thing, the Marcy Wheeler thing, where it's like, I have a duty to my country to do X. In meaning, if Donald Trump might have colluded with the Russians, media personalities, I think, also was working off that logic. So all of these guys just went with this narrative as if this narrative was a flat fact, because in their heads, Russia attacked America. Like, I think part of the reason you got the media collusion with the Democratic Party in this way is because all of them had incentives to drive their interests, meaning Democrats, of course, wanted to something to hit Trump with. They didn't care whether it was true. And from media standpoint, let's be honest, it puts asses in seats. This idea of a president, this Tom Clancy conspiracy with the president and the Russian government and all of this kind of stuff that goes on, in between in order to make this stuff work. They're looking at this as a certain conspiracy. Well, let me ask a specific point. Do you think that's...
But can I just address something real quick? And I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to address something that you just said.
Go for it.
So he had me on the show, Ray, and he immediately started asking me questions to establish some kind of set of shared objective facts, which, fine, if that's what the route you want to go down. I was trying to answer all of his questions. He was interrupting me after approximately 10 seconds. And you have to give a preface when when you're addressing a series of very complex issues, and this entire story is incredibly complex. I've been following it every single day for almost 3 years, and even I still feel like I don't know all the details. So
let me ask you: do you believe? And because that interview, he was being a dick that entire interview. I mean, impugning.
He was doing a Bill O'Reilly style ambush.
Yeah, it was nonsense. I mean, I don't know why anybody. I got to be honest. I don't know why anybody would go on Cedar Show. If you're gonna have a conversation with Cedar, that should be on a different thing. I've seen people go on the show, and for the most part, it becomes he's doing a show. And in this case, he's trying to defend what he got wrong. He got it massively wrong. He was uncritical of somebody who was bringing onto his show, whether he thought they did awesome work or not. At the end of the day, he was uncritical of somebody who came on his show, and that person got it magnificently wrong. And instead of him just kind of like, you know what, you're right. I got that part wrong. I should have been a little bit more critical.
And by the way, if he said that, I would applaud him. I mean, I really appreciate when people admit wrongdoing. Lord knows I've committed wrongdoing at times, and I try to hold myself to account for it and improve. I mean, that's all we can do as humans, right?
Michael Isikoff. That's exactly what he did on MSNBC. Michael Isikoff wrote the book on collusion with David Korn. And Michael Isikoff kind of made this point like, look, the Mueller report, just even the quotes in the Barr memo, to some degree, destroyed this notion of the Trump dossier, which was the thing that was used to start all of this.
They said, and it's just incredible how little this was emphasized because it was such an earth-shattering or earth-shaking revelation. They said on that interview, Isikoff actually said it, and David Korn begrudgingly agreed partially. Yeah, because he's still going down the conspiracy rabbit hole. I mean, that is truly despicable. I talked about that a lot on Jimmy Dore's show. But Isikoff confirmed that the Steele dossier, which animated the entire perception of this story from the beginning because it was so salacious, and it alleged this years-long deep conspiracy between Trump and Russia.
Yeah.
Isikoff and Korn admitted, and they were the people who injected this dossier into the media bloodstream.
Yeah,
I mean, they are essentially responsible for it even being a thing. They admitted it was a fraud.
Yeah.
It was
mind-blowing, right? That's mind-blowing, especially for Korn to admit that.
Yeah, exactly. But Korn is not going down different paths to kind of save his reputation and say that he was never wrong. He never alleged collusion. The conspiracy's still out there. It's like X-Files. The truth is out there.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's hilarious. It's like he's trying to absolve himself of blame.
But if somebody like Sam or any of these other journalist-adjacent types who gave progressive validation to this militaristic conspiratorial fairy tale for 3 years, if any of them want to atone, admit their faults, and move forward, I welcome that wholeheartedly. In fact, I did a full podcast this past week. People should go listen to with this guy, Jordan Uhl, who is a prominent Twitter persona. You may have heard of him. His last name is spelled U-H-L. Mm-hmm. And part of what led him to rise to prominence was that in 2017, he organized this thing called the March for Truth. It was a nationwide day of action for liberals and some leftists and Democrats who were really impassioned about the entire Trump-Russia story and wanted to demand accountability. And of course, it ended up accelerating this descent into conspiratorial lunacy. And I saw it firsthand by covering it and talking to the people who attended it and recognized, wow, this is a really deranged
group of people. Yeah.
Right. I mean, even some well-meaning people, but they've succumbed to this derangement that's being fed down their throats by people like Cenk, by people like Sam Cedar, by people like Jordan Uhl. And thankfully, Jordan Uhl later came to sincerely regret his role in organizing it. He's rejected his entire approach to this entire affair, and he's basically said, I was totally wrong, and I'm sorry. And we had a long and really productive conversation about it. People can look at my channel or Patreon if they want to hear it. And I genuinely, from a place of sincerity in my heart, thank him for that. So if that's what Sam wanted to do or any of these other people, I would feel the exact same way. The point is that they're digging it even further. They're making it worse for themselves. And most of all, they're actually helping and strengthening Trump.
You think that arrogant, smug SOB is ever going to say he was wrong? Oh, good luck. Good luck. He's like, and this is exactly my point. When the information came out, there was an interview with Rachel Maddow. I can't think of his name. David Engel, real journalist. And he's having a conversation with Maddow, and he's telling her, he's like,
Richard Engel, just so people know.
Richard Engel, I'm sorry, thank you. And he's like, look, this is unproven. This is rumor and innuendo.
Yeah, like Jimmy Dore played that clip when I was on with him 2 days ago.
Yeah, I had the clip loaded because I wanted to talk about the video on the show. And it's like it destroys the narrative. And he's being very clear. There's no there that anybody is aware of. And we've chased down these stories and we haven't found anything. A journalist looking at this saying there's no there. Then you have this situation, though. But his point was, look, this was dropped into the public sphere for a reason. This was never meant to be dropped in the public sphere. This was a political operation document that elements of the FBI were able to get a FISA warrant in order to spy on the Trump. Like, this stuff looks bad. Like, this looks extremely bad.
Here's why it looks so bad, Jamarl, and this point is so crucial. And it it's why this story is just not going to go away for the foreseeable future. As sick as people might be of it, it's not going away because we're only now in the beginnings of the phase where we really reckon with what happened. And what happened was the senior most officials in the U.S. government in law enforcement, intelligence, the so-called deep state, which Trump railed about, and he often put it in oversimplified partisan terms and didn't portray it properly. But nonetheless, he was correct that there was this movement from the most powerful security state officials in the entire country, and I can name some of them: James Comey, the director of the FBI, John Brennan, the director of the CIA, Andrew McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI and later director when Comey was fired, Peter Strzok.
The reason I said Loretta Lynch said that she was going to be separate from the investigation itself, that she was whatever they gave, she was going to accept. And, there's an odd, hypocrisy associated with this, where Joanne Reed and all these guys would decry this notion that the president of the United States chooses the attorney general and that person is presiding over the case. The exact same thing was true in the Obama situation. The Secretary of State was under potential was going to be perp walked. And the Obama administration, of course, has Loretta Lynch. They didn't call for a special prosecutor on that. They just said, okay, we're going to let Comey do it and we're going to back away from it. But you find out later that Loretta Lynch did push back, meaning when Comey and I think it was Lisa Page went to the Attorney General with these notions of, or the Justice Department, saying, look, there's negligence here. At the very least, there's negligence here, which makes all the sense in the world. Of course there's negligence in what was taking place. And they pushed back on it, saying, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. Now, this flies in the face of this notion that the Justice Department that was somehow separate and distinct from the investigation itself. They were pushing back on it. And this was ratified by a senator, meaning one of the representatives that interrogated is the wrong word, but in the hearing, I guess you can say it's a closed hearing with Anita Hill, corroborated that is exactly true and that is exactly what took place.
Yeah, so all these officials, again, the ones I named, James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, many of whom later became cable news stars.
Oh, yeah.
And set the tone for the media coverage because they were hired by the very media entities that they had previously fed information to as sources, which is another crazily unethical component of all this. But all these people conspired to launch incredibly unprecedented, extra-legal, arguably, actions to undermine Trump, to the point that even after Trump had assumed office and he had fired Comey, they had what looks like a total mental breakdown and contemplated launching an actual coup, to the point that Rod Rosenstein, who was a Trump appointee and like an institutional Republican guy, contemplated with the head of the FBI at the time, McCabe, who's now on this bookstore, and liberals are buying his book, by the, I don't know how many books he sold, but it was at the top of the Amazon, the New York Times bestseller list for a long time. So he's wealthy now through all this. Those two, the senior most law enforcement officials in the entire country, plotted to, quote, wear a wire on the president of the United States in the White House so they could remove him from power.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing.
Think about that.
Entirely mind-blowing.
And nobody in progressive media cared about it.
Well, no, because they hated Trump. This is my point. They hated Trump. Like, it's kind of like Obama is a Muslim, Kenyan, Manchurian candidate. And Republicans will repeat this, and it's like, this is nonsense. But they hated Obama, so they didn't care. I think the same thing is true here. This is birtherism for the Democratic Party.
And here's why the real offense in all this was never any kind of international espionage conspiracy, which is what liberals were obsessed about for 3 years. The real crime was always the security state machinations of these people who sought to block Trump by launching investigations on false pretenses. We still don't even know really why this investigation was launched. I mean, we have bits and pieces of information that give insight into how it came to be, but we still don't have the full story. I mean, there are all these little details, like George Papadopoulos supposedly was caught in a bar talking to the Australian ambassador in London about something, but he was like this totally inconsequential figure, so why would there be any real investigative focus on him? John Brennan came, or a UK intelligence official flew to the United States and briefed John Brennan sometime in the summer of 2016 about supposed Trump-Russia ties. Carter Page, had a FISA warrant used on him to surveil him. He's a U.S. citizen using the Steele dossier, which is now an admitted fraud.
Yep.
And there may yet be more that comes out that gives insight into how all this was actually launched. We still don't know, but there was something reminiscent of a coup attempt. Matt Taibbi and I talked about this in an epic podcast and video yesterday that's going to come out either today or tomorrow. So people should check that out because we get into really intense detail about it. And the more you think about it, the more jaw-dropping it is. And also the more jaw-dropping it is that the media totally disregarded this element of the story, except for conservative media, like the Federalist, like the Washington Times, like even Fox News, Daily Caller had actually some of the best reporting, and the liberal media almost totally ignored it with the exception of like 5 of us guys, in this kind of skeptics caucus who tried to get to the actual story here. And it's really insane when you think about it. There was a coup attempt. It was like something that if it had happened in, like, let's say Belarus or Uganda or some other country that we regard as like third world status or approaching that, we would say, wow, that society is unstable.
Yeah.
There are extra legal moves going on to upend the governing regime.
To take down the president of the United States. The wild part about this, though, is Mike Pence would have been the guy who was taking a seat. Like, it's like, oh, we removed Trump. Hooray, we've got Mike Pence. But Mike Pence was more familiar with that element of the party of sorts. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like factions. This kind of gets to my point why the first question was nonsense. It's like, do you believe there should have been an investigation? Well, all of the information that was being released to the public was giving you this impression that Donald Trump was somehow colluded with the Russians. I suppose you have to have an investigation. But then you find out that in real world terms, if you get to the nub of it, somebody was looking at the information and they gave you that information, but weighted it honestly, like, look, this was a political operations document, would you be inclined to be for the investigation? The answer is probably going to be no. It depends on how you frame the question.
The reason why, I was trying to answer that question he was asking, right? But I kept getting interrupted mercilessly and mocked, and he was just lobbing out juvenile insults. But what I was trying to tell him is that I was agnostic about the investigation because we don't know why it was launched.
Yeah.
Usually when prosecutorial investigations are launched, they're trying to uncover evidence for a crime. There was no real crime that anybody really identified, except this notion of collusion, which was never
nobody knows what that means.
Crime, right? And so there was an informational deficit, which said to me, I can't assess whether this Mueller investigation is something that I want to support. I know there were liberals and Democrats marching in the streets declaring how much they love Mueller and wanted him to swoop down and save democracy, but I was never on that camp. Right. So I was agnostic and I said, if over the course of this multi-year investigation, it turns out that unrelated criminality is found and people who are in positions of power who happen to be in Trump's orbit end up facing criminal repercussions, okay, that's fine. And sure enough, that end up happening. Manafort's going to be now in prison for 7.5 years. He was put in solitary confinement. The prosecutors Mueller's prosecutors, this guy, Andrew Weissman, tried to psychologically break Paul Manafort by throwing him in solitary confinement to extract a confession from him of the Trump-Russia conspiracy. And there was just no such conspiracy.
It didn't exist.
So they've had him in solitary confinement for no apparent reason. Yeah, I agree that Manafort is by no stretch a sympathetic figure, but a lot of people in the federal prison system are not sympathetic figures. Doesn't mean that you subject them to psychological torture, which is what the UN says solitary confinement is. Right?
Yeah,
Manning was subject to solitary confinement, and pretty much every liberal and progressive and leftist agreed that was wrong, right? But because Paul Manafort's not a sympathetic figure, it's somehow really great and fun and something to celebrate. No, it's actually sick and depraved.
It is. No, it is. All of this.
But that's what I was all about. But this is all, it's a complicated issue, right? So he was trying to do like a police interrogation on me and say, yes or no, was the investigation justified? I was like, well, Sam, there's actually a lot that goes into this question that needs to be distinguished carefully.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say I supported something that I think had a really perverse impact on the body politic and and the core mandate of the investigation was shown to have been utterly fraudulent.
Yeah, I mean, that's the part that people continuously jump over. Like when you're looking at mainstream media, I was watching mainstream media when this first came out, and she gave the report. She explained the elements of the report. Donald Trump did not collude with the Russians. It was very clear, like unequivocal, clear. And then she immediately moved on to the obstruction stuff. It's like, wait a minute, you spent 3 years with the central thesis that Donald Trump colluded with the Russians. Maybe you should give it more than a few seconds before moving on to the second. It's like,
you mean Maddow?
Do it.
Maddow did this? You mean?
Hmm?
You mean Maddow did this, or who is she?
No. This was CBS News. Just
okay.
Newswoman or the news guy,
right?
Gets the report. He's reading the report out,
right?
And he's like, there's no collusion. Now let's jump to obstruction. It's like, wait a minute, you've spent 3 years on it.
It's so dishonest, right? I mean, the top line, takeaways, the headlines for a lot of news outlets covering that Barr letter was that Trump hadn't been exonerated on obstruction.
But New York Times
was like so ancillary to this entire investigation. It only came about because he fired Comey.
Yes. Well, he fired
had nothing
Comey.
to do with
saying nice things about Russia. According to McCabe, he was saying nice things about Russia and, some Twitter stuff. Like, it doesn't sound like there was any evidentiary basis for them to do this.
So if you're emphasizing the obstruction element, you're just continuing the fraud and the deceit. Because there
was no underlying element.
You're misrepresenting what the nature of this entire thing was to your audience. So shame on whoever that CBS woman was. I've seen NPR doing this. I saw the Pod Save America podcast goons doing it. The Obama bros who have now the podcast empire because they just tout the whatever. I don't even want to get into those guys. They make me so so angry. These people have all been saying that the main takeaway is that he wasn't exonerated on obstruction. In a way, he was exonerated because Mueller could have recommended indictment for obstruction.
He didn't do it.
He chose not to do that. He just said it wasn't a set of legal question.
Yeah.
So, if you're charged with a crime or I'm charged with a crime and the prosecutor or if we're investigated for a crime rather, and the police give evidence to a local prosecutor or something, and the prosecutor says, well, yeah, there's some evidence here, but it's not a set of legal questions, so we're going to decline to press charges. You're essentially exonerated of those charges because you're not going to trial. You're not going to be arrested. The crime is now off the books, right? And that's what happens with regard even to this obstruction question, which they're not emphasizing. So the no exoneration wasn't actually as significant as they're making it out to be.
I think it's kind of like if you get pulled over and you have pot in the car. Let's say you have weed in the car, and
never happened to me, by the way. Of course not.
No, well, I'm just saying whoever it is, but you get pulled over. There's pot in the car. The cop says, "Can I inspect your car?" You say no, and the cop searches it anyway.
I don't agree to any searches. That's the line.
Exactly, and it's like you get to court and the judge says, "Why did you pull him over?" And it becomes some kind of bogus reason. He looked a particular way. He turned his eye from me when when I looked at him.
Right.
And the judge is like, that's not a justifiable reason to pull an American citizen over who has due process from searches. And so we're throwing this out. It doesn't matter that you found pot in the car because all of it was fruit of a poisonous tree at that point. It's like you found something in somewhat of an illegal search. It feels this way about Trump also. It's like you guys have found factoids, but the original premise that you were using to even start it was bogus.
Yeah, and side note about police stops. I actually covered this story, that issue pretty extensively back before everybody lost their minds in 2016, and we can actually cover other issues. But essentially, all across the U.S., police have such broad range or broad discretion to pull over anybody for any reason at any time, even if it's utterly pretextual, such that most judges are not going to throw out a case that ends with them finding marijuana in your car just because the reason for the initial traffic stop were pretextual. I mean, that's not how it works. Police have such authoritarian license to do basically whatever they want with anybody on the road. So your civil liberties are just obliterated by virtue of you driving a car. It's actually insane. Anyway, that's just a side note. People can actually look up the Vice piece that I did on that in 2014 if they want. But I was going to say that, so the core issue here is that the investigation appears overwhelming to have been launched now on false pretenses. I mean, Andrew McCabe launched this kind of secondary counterintelligence investigation on Trump after the May 2017 firing of Comey on the grounds that, so McCabe says, he had cause to believe that Trump himself posed a national security threat because of his foreign policy priorities. So they're criminalizing Trump's foreign policy priorities. Imagine if they had done that to Obama because he was trying to do an Iran deal, or because he pushed back, minorly on some of what the Israeli government under Netanyahu wanted, or because he wouldn't send lethal arms to Ukraine. Theoretically, there could have been a security state move to criminalize those foreign policy departures, or in the future, President Bernie could have some of these same security state apparatchiks moving against him, and they could move against him because there's a precedent enshrined by all these people and by the liberals who celebrated them and justified it and rationalized it. I did a Twitter thread yesterday that Hillary Clinton is actually much more personally responsible for this entire narrative than we yet appreciate. And I think more will come out confirming that. So there was this TV appearance that her campaign manager, Robbie Mook, did in August 21st or 23rd, late August 2016. He went on ABC with George Stephanopoulos, or maybe it was Martha Raddatz. He went on the ABC Sunday show, and it was really the first time that I can ascertain that the Hillary Clinton campaign started pushing out this notion, not just that Trump had like suspicious connections with Russia, but that he was Russia's puppet, and that Russia had infiltrated his campaign and wielded illicit direct control of him.
I did a video on this. Yeah, I did a video on this.
And that's when this really became a thing. And sure enough, not prior to that, we later found out, not long prior to that is when the CIA and the FBI investigation into this whole subject really kicked into high gear. So there was a confluence of events in sometime around mid to late July of 2016 to mid to late August. So like a month time frame in that summer, where all this really kicked into high gear. It was after Trump won the nomination at the formally received the nomination at the Republican convention in mid-July, and all of a sudden you have all this kind of rapid fire movement in the security state where people are freaking out, and that's when a lot of this stuff happens. Like Carter Page gets the FISA warrant, and Brennan takes this meeting with this British intelligence official, and we still don't know like what guiding principle was there. Was there a directive issued? I'm not saying I have evidence of this, but it seems plausible that there could have been. And again, I'm trying to always fact based, but I'm saying there is a potentially reasonable inference to be made that this was all done in some kind of coordinated effort that implicated the Hillary campaign, the Obama administration, or elements of it. Maybe not Obama himself, actually, but his appointees. Yeah, and even members of the media. So again, I don't want to overstate the extent to which it was like a true conspiracy, right? It's probably
I don't think that's a leap. I mean, I don't think that's a leap. I mean, come on. We already know about the way elements of the FBI essentially were conspiring. Well, let's say members of the FBI, high up in the FBI itself, were having these type of conversations. We know that
Peter Strzok and Lisa Page were saying that they wanted an insurance policy against Trump.
Yeah,
in the event that he got elected.
Like it seems like there were elements, and the media looks at this and says, "No, this looks weird, but no, they don't go there." And I thought it was
only conservative media went there. They're the only ones who covered it.
But it's bizarre that they that media didn't look at that and says, "Wait a minute, this looks suspicious." And I guarantee you, if the roles were reversed and it was a Republican administration that was overseeing this, they would have dug into this like nobody's business. I mean, come on. Hillary Clinton's in the book Shattered. One of the things towards the end when she loses the election, there's this descriptive meeting that they had of her talking to her communications team saying, "Look, I didn't lose it because of me. I lost it because of Trump and Russia. That Russia somehow colluded, and you guys need to go out there and make sure the media understands that." These political campaigns have fingers in all sorts of media. Whether it's like you're my source and your source gives you information. It's like, hey, Trump is working with Russia, put it out there. And they run with it. And at the point where they run with it, now it's all over the media. What is the FBI or CIA or some of these guys going to do? And not just that, some of these guys were instrumental in releasing the information to the press in the first place. Like whether it was coordinated or they just hated Trump, that might have been an organizing principle without there being an organization to it. That makes sense.
Within 24 hours, according to that book, Shattered, which is the definitive insider account of the Hillary Clinton campaign by the most plugged-in reporters who were there every step of the way, within 24 hours of her defeat, Mook and Podesta decided, with Hillary's approval, presumably, right? I mean, how could they not have had her approval, that they were going to push out this narrative that she lost the election because of Russia.
Yes.
That's what they said. I mean, they had complaints about Comey and the letter and all, and unfair media coverage and whatever else. But they said the overriding narrative that they wanted out there was Russia, and that animated almost 2.5 more years of this entire story. And in addition, I mean, the Hillary connections go so much deeper. She funded the dossier.
Yep.
And then covered up the fact that she funded it by using this law firm to have plausible deniability, I guess. And it only came out because the Washington Post reported it in the fall of 2017, a year or so after the election, after the Steele dossier already got released, and everybody saw the most salacious details, like Trump had a golden shower party or something in a Moscow hotel. Right. And that period of time I mentioned in the summer of 2016, when all this seemed to kind of coalesce into motion, was also the time when Hillary was assiduously courting Republican security state officials to endorse her campaign. They put out these letters of denunciation of Trump saying, yes, we're lifelong Republicans, but Trump is such a extreme threat that we're going to go back on our affiliation from all this time and get behind Hillary. So she would feature neoconservatives in her ads. But
in no way could the.
So you had people like Robert Kagan, who was holding fundraisers for Hillary around this time. And Robert Kagan, who was one of the most influential neoconservative intellectuals who set the groundwork for the theory on which the Bush administration predicated the invasion of Iraq. That was the guy that Hillary courted to hold fundraisers for her in summer of 2016. This was reported on The Intercept by Ronnie Akalik, actually, at that point. And he had others. Paul Wolfowitz said he was going to back her at that time. Again, one of the main theoreticians in the Bush administration for the Iraq War. David Frum, Bush's speechwriter, coined the axis of evil phrase and was one of the most ardent advocates of the Iraq War, became a big Hillary supporter. Max Boot, who's now at the Washington Post, is one of the most prominent columnists. He was this Weekly Standard fire breather saying, after 9/11, we have to expand the American empire, and part of that entails invading Iraq. All these people came into the Hillary camp, so to say, in addition to the CIA and other intelligence officials who were interfering in American domestic politics in an unprecedented fashion, to the point where Mike Morrell, who was a CIA director, went and published an op-ed at the New York Times saying that Trump is a compromised stooge of Putin, and therefore it's a moral imperative to back Hillary.
That's amazing.
This is the CIA getting involved in partisan American politics. That used to be totally verboten.
But that's exactly my point. If somebody said, do you believe there should be an investigation? Then the point is, the groundwork was seeded. Like, how can you come to any other conclusion? But it's more important, the fact that conclusion was somewhat imposed upon you, if that makes sense. Like, this wasn't something that you can come to reasonably because all the information was available and you just kind of had an honest. No, this was almost like a psyop on the American public in order to get them to believe a particular thing. And I still say people were believing based on incentives, not necessarily based on objective reality. Let me ask you this on Cenk. So Cenk, I've done a few videos on this because I've been somewhat enamored and fascinated by the backup or the backstep. This idea of, look, I wasn't a Russiagator. Those stupid Democrats put all of their eggs in one basket, and I knew from the beginning that this has nothing to do with Trump colluding with Russia. And all those stupid Democrats, they've given him a hand. And it's like,
it's hilarious.
It's like, but dude, there's video of you saying it swung the election.
He said over and over and over again, including with me physically in the room. Okay, so I saw it with my own two eyes, that Trump had a corrupt deal with Russia, which led to him receiving their assistance over the course of the election, swinging the election, and therefore Trump was going to try to reward Russia while he was in office, and they were both going to benefit. And that to him was collusion.
And
he said, yes, there was collusion. We have the quotes, okay? And
Trump
he would mock me.
Also. It was supposed
he would get on video and mock me by name because he said, "Oh, Michael Tracey's going to have egg on his face when Trump is marched out of the White House in handcuffs."
Yeah. He was pissed. He was pissy about that. I mean, that's, you know, it's one thing if you say my position over this changed over the course of the investigation.
Yeah,
Isikoff did that. Isikoff was like, I wrote the book on collusion, but as information, you know, came out, I pulled back on this notion of Trump and Russia, even though I think he's still corrupt and that type of stuff. I can understand this idea of, look, my perspective of this change over the course of the investigation. The perspective of, I was never in this camp to begin with, is a little dodgy to me. That's a little dodgy to me.
It's pure denialism. It's denialism, and most of the Democratic Party and most of the media is still in denial. It's like one of the phases of grief, right? Denial, and then later on, eventually acceptance. And there's almost nobody who's in the acceptance phase except for that one guy who I did a podcast with, right? He's the only one.
No, they're
but the point is, the more and Tulsi Gabbard, actually, although she was right all along.
Yeah.
Who I also interviewed on my podcast, and that's on Patreon and YouTube as well. And we get into the fact that she is the only one who got this story right among the Democratic primary field.
No, that was a really good interview. It was two parts to the interview. I watched both. They were both really good. When you were working there, was there pressure on you to take a particular position, or for the most part, Cenk was hands off and just was like, "Look, all of you guys are going to have your own different positions on this," you know? Or was there a pressure at the network to conform, and maybe not necessarily explicit, but maybe somewhat of an informal pressure?
I mentioned this to Jimmy, right? So for all my criticism of Trump, it's the 100% true that he never imposed any restrictions on what I could say ever. So I mean, that is actually very laudable, and I'm still thankful for him for that. I'm still grateful that I was given the opportunity from the Young Turks that I got. So it's nothing petty or personal. I mean, it's a real luxury and a privilege to be able to work for a media organization and like just cover stuff that I'm interested in and talk on YouTube and whatever. Yeah. And right, I mean, that's a real luxury. So I'm very thankful for that. He never imposed any restrictions. However, I mean, there are more subtle pressures when you're a member of any institution. Mm-hmm. So if people think that you're crazy and wrong and you're helping Trump in this progressive organization, that's going to manifest in subtle and not so subtle ways, right? Trump, I mean, Cenk wasn't so subtle when he went on live YouTube and said that I had blinders on and I was going to be proven wrong because Trump was going to get marched out of the White House. Yeah,
that video didn't age well at all.
And like Don Jr. and Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner were all going to end up in a paddy wagon that Mueller was going to be driving around Washington, D.C. or something. So there were subtle manifestations of pressure in that, you know, I think eventually they did get a little tired of me covering this so single-mindedly as I did, even though I thought, you know, I went back and reviewed some of the reporting I did in 2017 in particular on various facets of the story, and I think all of it holds up perfectly, not to toot my own horn, but like I would go to these town hall meetings. Remember in 2017 when there was a lot of interest around town hall meetings because Democrats were showing up and they were, you know, trying to pressure Republican members of Congress. Well, what were they pressuring them on primarily? Russia.
Oh, I thought it was ACA. I'm sorry.
Well, it was ACA, but it was ACA and Russia. Russia often was the more important issue to a lot of these people, in my experience, having gone to many of them. Mm-hmm. That was more often than not the predominant issue. And you know, I go back and look at some of those, you know, posts I did, and people can go, you know, Google it, just type that Michael Tracey, Young Turks Medium 2017 or something. All of it'll come up. And I would go to these town hall meetings, and there would be, you know, ordinary citizens who are, again, mostly well-meaning, but who were just blinkered by this conspiracy logic, showing up and waving signs saying, you know, Trump is an agent of Putin, Trump is compromised, he's a traitor, impeach now, et cetera, et cetera. And these are the questions they would be posing to their elected representatives very often. And I remember I looked at a clip yesterday where I went to this town hall meeting in San Diego that was being held by Susan Davis and Scott Peters, who were both Democratic representatives from the area. They had like a joint town hall, and we were in like a media scrum at the end. So a scrum is like when after an event, the politician or whoever has the media kind of encircle him or her, and they ask him questions. And unprompted, Scott Peters made this claim that Putin is controlling the U.S. government. I swear to God, look it up. Okay?
No, I believe you because I've heard it. I've heard somebody else.
This is a member of Congress, right? And not even one of the wackier ones.
There was a
He wasn't like an Adam Schiff or an Eric Swalwell, right? He was actually one of the just more generic Democrats. And this is what the assumption he was operating under. And I asked him to substantiate that claim many times, and he couldn't do it. And,
that statement has been made on more than one occasion, and so it wasn't just him. I mean, that notion of, Vladimir Putin is controlling our president, and it's like, what? Even Cenk said during he was having an interview, a back and forth with Armitage, and there's a part in it where Cenk makes this point that I think Vladimir Putin is giving Donald Trump instructions, and Armitage gives this kind of smirk, like, what? Like,
wait. So what policy has Trump been instructed to implement that is favorable to Russia? He's done nothing.
He's done nothing. And I know he makes the argument of sanctions. He's like, oh, those sanctions. And it's like, but you understand that if Trump pushes those sanctions through, it's almost like saying, Vladimir Putin, help me get elected. Like, no president would do that. I don't know any president that would go undermine their own notion of their electability.
And that's such a tragedy. And that's such a tragedy of this whole episode, which is that Trump actually did campaign and was elected on a platform of better relations with Russia. He at least said that many times over the course of the 2016 campaign. But because the political environment in the United States became so frenzied,
toxic
to the point where anybody in his orbit who had a handshake, literally, with a Russian, that was then put into this like Washington Post and New York Times database as a quote Russian tie.
They're gonna be indicted. Yeah.
So like Jeff Sessions spoke to a Russian at the Republican convention and like shook his hand and like exchanged pleasantries, and this was a Russian tie.
That's amazing. Think about what's being said on this. That's fast. Like that's mind blowing. But it's politically.
But it meant that he couldn't actually implement an agenda to forge better relations with Russia, so he did the opposite. He sent lethal arms to Ukraine. He bombed Russia's chief client state in the Middle East multiple times, Assad.
Well, just to be clear, I don't know if it was.
He tore up the INF treaty and escalated a nuclear arms race. Tulsi Gabbard talks about this all the time, and she's absolutely right. He's trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela, which is Russia's chief ally in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, the list goes on.
But
Trump tried to intercede and personally pressure Angela Merkel to not purchase natural gas from Russia, which is like the most extreme kind of economic warfare you can do with regard to with Eurasian affairs, essentially. So, I mean, there's just too many examples of this to name.
Well,
he hasn't done any policy that's favorable to Russia for the most part.
That was kind of what I was going to say. I agree with you on that. Like, I make the same points of like.
And by the way, that reflects badly on him. Trump is at fault for that. He's the president. He succumbed to those pressures, and that's his fault. It's not entirely the fault of Democrats, but you can't separate domestic political dynamics from the conduct of foreign policy. That's just an axiom of international relations theory.
No, I understand that. I guess Donald Trump was somehow constrained by, like you said, the domestic environment. I don't necessarily know if it was a direct threat. Like, I agree that they made the environment toxic, meaning it was impossible for him to get anything done because anything that he does with Russia at that point gets, deemed as he's helping Putin. It's like Donald Trump's like, we're taking our troops out. Oh my God, Vladimir Putin is going to love the strategy of the United States taking troops out of Syria. Or we're pulling troops out of Afghanistan. Oh my God, the president is controlled by Putin. And this was even from lefties. I heard Tom Hartman giving this red bait stuff. Tom Hartman would say, I don't think our troops should be there, but... And then go into this kind of Russia phobia, berserker rage about Donald Trump. It does matter. I know Cedar was almost making this opposite argument, like it doesn't matter that there's this kind of toxic environment with the way they were denigrating Russians during all of this. It matters. Using this term of tax, I remember when this first started, they were talking about like an attack on democracy itself.
They're still saying that.
It was insane. You said it again? You say who?
They're still saying that. Gerald Nadler. So the member of Congress from Manhattan and Brooklyn, who would have presided over impeachment hearings, and I'm sure he's very disappointed that he probably won't get that opportunity now. But he went on Chris Hayes' show on MSNBC in the spring of 2018 and said that the Russian Twitter trolling and Facebook memes, again, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm not exaggerating. I swear to God, look it up.
I've seen this episode. Go ahead. I know
he said that that trolling directed by Russia, purportedly, was tantamount to Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pearl Harbor, which led to the United States entering World War II, the most destructive global war in human history. That's what he said. That's how utterly deranged, beyond imagination, this really got.
It's the
people shouldn't forget it.
Especially with the U.S. role. It's like the idea that the bully gets mad that somebody takes his lunch money. Like, even if you're right, it's like, even if everything you're saying is true, what's the exception of Trump and Russia stuff? The Facebook and Twitter trolls were being used by the Russian government to somehow undermine America. Mind you, I don't even necessarily buy that part. And it's not that I think Russia wouldn't do it. I think countries do that. I think powers try to get the best thing that they can get out of other countries. The United States has done it for the past 100 years. That fact alone blows me away that this is being blown into the proportion that it's been blown.
Well, I mean, the just before Obama left office, so in early January 2017, there was infamously this report put out by James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, summarizing the views of all the intelligence agencies with regard to, quote, Russian interference. And he said that Putin directed this supposed interference campaign. And part of that interference campaign, allegedly, was these Twitter trolls and Facebook memes. And the idea that Twitter trolls and Facebook memes are now central to like a massive geopolitical controversy is ridiculous in its own right, but there's never been any evidence put forward that Putin directed it. Is it plausible that Russians were responsible for, shit posting online?
Well, yeah.
Sure. I mean, Adrian Chen, this journalist who was at the New Yorker for a while, and I believe he wrote a piece for New York Times Magazine in 2015, well before any of this Trump stuff, on how basically the Internet Research Agency in Russia, I guess in St. Petersburg, just tries to game like social media algorithms for commercial benefit.
But it makes sense during a political campaign.
And that's what they did. They made it. It wasn't, almost certainly wasn't like some really elaborate espionage conspiracy. It was just them doing what they had been doing, and the topic of Trump just happened to be the most dominant topic at the time that they were doing it. So of course they were, latching onto it. And Trump got a lot of social media attention because he was like this, he's the most prolific tweeter in the world. He's the most visible tweeter in the entire world. He's a tweeter in chief.
And it's like, if an organization that posts Twitter memes or Facebook memes, and that's the way they earn their revenue, if you're doing a political cycle, would you talk about politics? Yeah, of course. Like during an election, if I'm talking about the politics and the politicians involved, my views go up. Well, that's to be expected because you're in a political season and people are more tuned to it. And beyond being more tuned to it, is it possible that the Russians involved prefer Trump? Yeah, it is. In which case, you may get a disparity.
Why wouldn't they? The Russians, here's another fascinating thing, okay? Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev in 2012 publicly stated that they preferred Barack Obama to Mitt Romney. Because Mitt Romney was running around saying that Russia is America's chief political foe, and he was going to implement belligerent policies to counteract Russia. So, of course, it would just be natural that they would prefer Barack Obama, right? But nobody made a fuss about it because nobody cared at the time.
Yeah.
But when the dynamic was the same in 2016, 4 years later, it just happened to be such the case that Trump, the Republican nominee, was the one advocating more of a détente-style relationship with Russia. The fact that Russia then preferred Trump is cast in this kind of outlandishly
this nefarious way. Light where Vladimir Putin is controlling the president of the United States. This stuff it's hysteria on hysteria. Last question. Is there? Oh, let me go to tweets before we go. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you might have wanted to mention or talk about?
No, I think we covered most of it.
Okay. Let's see. I have someone asking, where is it? Here we are. This is important because TYT viewers need to understand that Cenk was pushing the mainstream media's narrative.
Yeah, that's the thing. Here's another sad aspect of all this. TYT, and I said this on Twitter, and I really meant it. They became, MSNBC light on this subject.
You've taken my word.
Oh, did I? Oh, sorry. I should have attributed you. I apologize.
No, you're fine. I've used that term for years because I thought the term applied. Mainstream media light, like
they just followed the daily. They just followed the daily narrative that you could have got if you were sitting around on a couch watching MSNBC.
Yeah,
there was no real difference there, aside from the fact, and I give them credit for this again, that they did allow people with heterodox views in the network, like me and Jimmy Dore. So it wasn't as if there was a total blackout as there was on MSNBC. That makes them better in that way. But in terms of the main show, it was total MSNBC light. It was Trump derangement. It was people who lost their critical faculties, people who didn't pursue an evidence-based rational opposition to Trump, which is what I was always advocating, because they were so consumed by this furor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, and they'll never admit it because it runs contrary to what their whole brand is supposed to be, which is that we counter the mainstream narrative or whatever. No, you were just as tethered to the mainstream narrative as anybody. In fact, arguably it's even worse because you have a pretense of being anti-establishment or whatever, and you were just doing the establishment's bidding.
Yeah, I mean, supposedly your brand is to be separate and distinct from mainstream media narrative, and you were doing a mainstream media narrative. I suspect that's probably why he pivoted in this way, of where he at some point maybe it just became clear of like, okay, I'm not seeing the collusion stuff. Like I'm not seeing it, and the perspective started to shift. But own that, like it's.
You say that though, but like as late as last fall, like I think October of last year, 2018. I found a clip, and there may well be more of these, where he's saying proof of collusion because of some story which he kind of tendentiously construed as proof of collusion, which is not the case in the slightest.
After the election.
But, and by last fall, it should have been abundantly clear to anybody who had a cursory knowledge of how the Mueller investigation was progressing and how no American had been indicted for anything remotely resembling conspiratorially cooperating with any Russian state actors. In a sense of the 2016 election being compromised.
Oh,
it got less likely by the day that this would come out, and yet as late as then he was saying, "Oh yeah, there's proof of collusion." So I mean, he can dissemble all he wants, but when we have the quotes, right? So
let me ask you this: when you first started, part of my audience, there have been several audience members that's taken hate at TYT because of the reporter stuff. Meaning, we're trying to hire X number of reporters over the course of the year. Now, I thought this initiative was a good idea. That said, they wanted to raise $2 million. They wanted to bring on X number of reporters to essentially scour the countryside, just doing reporting, doing the news. When you were brought on, I always thought this was odd because I always thought if you need $2 million from your audience now, aren't you going to need it again for next year? Were you told that this was going to be a temporary short-term assignment when you first took this on, or was this expected to be somewhat an elongated experience?
What I'll say is it was always an open-ended experience, but I don't want to get too into the details of that.
Fair enough.
I'm not trying to hide anything. It's just I'd rather just stick to the substantive issues, especially now, given what's going on, Fair enough. I had to ask, and it was something I was totally curious about because I've done multiple shows on it, like asking this question of, wait a minute, if you need $2 million for 1 year, aren't you going to need it for the next year in order to keep your reporters on? But fair enough. I can understand that that's like under the table baseball. That's more of a thing about you as opposed to a thing about there are much more important things going on right now. That's the basic point.
Fair enough. The indomitable Michael Tracey. Please tell people where they can find your work and find you.
Yeah, Twitter, of course, Tracey. That's Tracey with an E. If you could link my YouTube channel to the video, that'd be great. It's
I think I'm even subscribed to you at this point.
Yeah. Like I said, my first interview was with Tulsi Gabbard. Second interview with Jordan Newell. Third one will be with Matt Taibbi. That'll be out either today or tomorrow. And then I have Patreon where you can get like the podcast version. Mm-hmm. And if you want to contribute, that's great. I'm not saying you got to contribute to me, but we need independent journalism and analysis in this country, and the Trump-Russia debacle more vividly illustrates that than almost anything I've seen in my entire life. It does, no more than anything I've ever seen, because look at the groupthink. Look at the commercial incentives, which just corrupted so many otherwise well-meaning people, even in progressive, quote-unquote, online media where the incentives are supposed to be different.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you want a different way forward, try to actualize that in your own conduct and, give $5 a month to somebody who you think is doing a good job. Again, it doesn't have to be me, but we need different models here, or else we're in for just more pain and disaster.
No, I agree with this. I mean, like you said, if nothing else, you ask the question of, who was right about the Iraq War, who was right about, Russiagate stuff, who was right about the Syrian chemical stuff. At the very least, people being willing to ask questions about what seems to be a foreign policy hell-bent on either domination or at the very least subjugation of other places and extraction of resources, with the media that tends to whitewash this. You know what I mean? Like the Venezuela thing, if nothing else, is extraordinarily illustrative. I mean, you have the president in an open-handed takedown of another country, trying to openly. They've even come out making the point of, we've been working with corporations in order to get their hands on the oil and the resources and stuff like this. But media doesn't report the story from that angle. Media reports it from this angle of, Venezuelan dictator Maduro is refusing humanitarian aid from a country that's trying to overthrow it. Like, it's such a bizarre, like, it's one thing if it was in the 50s when the CIA was taken down in government and everybody was like, oh my God, that government can't keep itself together, completely blissfully unaware that your government has something to do with it. But in cases like this, it seems like there is a whitewash of the behavior of the United States at a time where media is so, relevant. Like you can look on Twitter, and you can see somebody showing something that's taking place in France, the Yellow Vest movement, like on the spot, right then and there. Whether media covers it or not, you can see it for yourself and you can see it with your own eyes. So it discredits media itself when they're pushing certain narratives that people can, with their own eyes, see is wrong. Unfortunately, that's not everybody. And you still have mainstream media being the main vein at which people receive their information. I agree with you on this. I guess I'm making this long-winded point of, you're absolutely right. If nothing else shows it, this does.
Yeah, and they're going to try a whitewash, and if they're allowed to do it, it's going to have, I think, genuinely catastrophic consequences, and I despair at that prospect.
There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Doesn't mean that anyone was held accountable from the standpoint of media. Here's Judith Miller, but Judith Miller wasn't the only person pushing that story. And people who are responsible for the deaths of over 1 million people walked. I just walked out there finger painting right now. So I agree with you on this, man. Michael Tracey, everybody. Tracey, I'm going to put your link at the bottom itself so everybody can find your work and find where you are. I found you online. I found you on YouTube, and I was like, oh, he has a channel. Great. Great, because I agree with you on the need for independent journalists and awesome reporters. And
I actually have my own channel prior to joining the Young Turks, where I did kind of these long form interviews, and it kind of got subsumed into the Young Turks. So now it's all me again.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. One more thing, Charles Cavan. It really hurt when Bernie pushed Russiagate. Yes, it did hurt when Bernie pushed Russiagate. And the wild part about this is Tulsi Gabbard, like you said, was the only one that was, it might be true, it might not be true. We need to wait for the report to come to some conclusion. Sanders kind of pushed that, but Sanders was in this Russiagate camp where to some degree he was repudiating his own elements of his own base, Yeah,
I mean, there are clips and tweets of him saying things to the effect of Russia's blackmailing Trump and directing U.S. foreign policy. I mean, I like Bernie as much as the next guy.
That hurt.
But it's going to make him look horrible. It's going to be used against him. And, he has only himself to blame for trying to placate these kind of paranoid liberals who are probably always going to hate him anyway.
They're going to hate him anyway. It's not going to matter. They're going to hate him anyway. Pet Hacker. Aisha, why are you tipping your husband? Oh, that's funny. And Aisha Thomas, that's my wife. She gave $1. So thank you very much.
What's up, Aisha?
Yeah, I know, right? All right, guys. I'm going to end this here. Michael Tracey, dude, thank you. You're always welcome on the show anytime you want to come on the show. You're a friend of the show. I get defensive when people attack friends of the show. I think I've done it on more than one occasion. But no, dude, you're more than welcome to the show. I appreciate your work. So keep it up.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jamarl.
All right, guys. If you guys enjoy the content, you guys can share, like, subscribe. And, of course, you can always support the content through PayPal or Patreon. think so.